Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into a book that's, well, it's pretty difficult. This is part of our Reformed Thinking series.
We're tackling the book of Judges.
We are. And, a lot of people might know the big stories like Samson or Gideon, but they often skip the rest.
Which is a shame because it's so central to the whole biblical story.
So our goal for this deep dive is to look at the big picture of Judges. We want to see how the book is put together and why it seems, well, almost designed to show the need for a king, a righteous king.
That's it. We're going to trace Israel's downward spiral and ask what solution the Bible itself offers for the mess we see.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We're coming right off the end of the book of Joshua. The conquest is, for the most part, done. Israel is in the land.
Yeah.
So where does that put them, in relation to that huge promise made to Abraham, the Abrahamic covenant?
It's a really good question because the situation is kind of mixed, and that's what sets up the whole tragedy of Judges. The promise had, you could say, three parts. First, the promise of a great nation, a seed. Second, the promise of the land of Canaan. And third, the promise that through Israel, the whole world would be blessed.
So by the time we open Judges chapter 1, what's been checked off the list?
Well, the first two parts are physically there. They're a big population, a nation, and they are living in the land of Canaan.
Okay, so geographically, demographically, they're about 2/3 of the way there.
You could look at it that way, yeah. They're settled, they're numerous, they've got their inheritance.
So you'd think they're perfectly positioned for that third part, to be a light to the nations, to be that vehicle for blessing.
That's the logical next step. But the book of Judges just slams the brakes on that hope. It makes it crystal clear that just being in the land isn't enough to bring that blessing to the world.
Why not? What goes wrong?
The book is just relentless in showing that their failure is entirely spiritual. It's a systemic refusal to live under Yahweh's rule.
I can almost hear someone pushing back on that, though. They might say, well, hold on. At the start of Judges, they still hadn't driven out all the Canaanites.
Right.
You could argue their problem was an incomplete military conquest, a political failure. Why does the text insist it's something deeper?
That's really the heart of the matter. The problem isn't political or military at its root. Some scholars, Gregory Wong, for instance, he calls the theme of the book progressive deterioration.
Progressive deterioration.
He sees Israel just spiraling downwards into, worse and worse apostasy, the oppression they face from other nations. That's God's judgment on their spiritual sickness. It's not the cause of it.
So things like having no central government or the tribes not getting along, those are just the symptoms.
That's it, exactly. The actual disease, the root cause, was their failure to submit to the lordship of Yahweh. They already had a king.
Their covenant God?
Yes. He'd given them their entire legal and governmental structure at Sinai. But they just refused to be ruled by him. It was like they were declaring independence from their own divine king.
Yeah. And the book has that one phrase that just hammers this point home over and over again at the end.
Oh, it does. That chilling refrain that perfectly captures the spiritual anarchy. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes.
It's there in chapter 17, and then again, like the final word on the matter, at the very end of chapter 21.
It is. And when every person just decides for themselves what's right and wrong based on what they feel, any sense of national unity just falls apart. It's a recipe for total collapse.
So let's break that down. How did this doing what feels right actually play out? What were the specific things they were doing?
Well, the two big ones were just rampant idolatry and, maybe even worse, a complete loss of knowledge about God from one generation to the next.
The idolatry part.
Yeah.
The text mentions the Baals and the Ashtaroth a lot.
It does. Israel kept turning away from the Lord to serve these Canaanite gods.
Can you give us a sense of what that actually involved? Why was that so tempting for them?
Well, Baal was the Canaanite god of storms and fertility. He was supposed to bring the rain, make the crops grow, make the livestock multiply.
So for a nation of new farmers, that's a pretty big draw.
A huge draw. They'd look over at their Canaanite neighbors who were performing all these rituals, sometimes pretty chaotic rituals involving things like ritual prostitution, and they thought, hey, that seems to be working for them. It gets them rain.
So it wasn't just about a statue. It was trading the covenant relationship with Yahweh for what felt like a more direct transactional system. We do this, we get rain.
You've got it. They thought they could manipulate the divine. The Bible uses really strong language here. It says they hoard after other gods. It's a metaphor for spiritual adultery. They were breaking the very first, most basic rule of the covenant.
And this spiritual decay. It didn't just stay with the adults.
No, and this might be the most heartbreaking part of the whole book. The text says a new generation grew up who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel.
That's just devastating. It points to a total failure of the family, of the community.
It does. The whole structure given in Deuteronomy was that parents were supposed to constantly teach their children about the law, about the Exodus, about the covenant.
But they were too busy with Baal and doing what was right in their own eyes.
So the teaching stopped. And the kids grew up essentially as pagans. They had no story, no memory of being rescued from Egypt, no real reason to obey Yahweh.
Which brings us to that summary of their state you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. They were in the land, but not in the Lord. They had the geography, but not the devotion. They were supposed to be this agent of blessing for the world, but instead they just looked like everyone else. They attracted judgment, not blessing.
This really sets the stage for the whole cycle we see in the book then. The sin, the judgment, the crying out, the deliverance.
It's the repeating pattern that gives the book its shape. Israel sins, God allows them to be oppressed, they cry out for help, and then in his mercy, God sends a judge, a deliverer.
But it never sticks.
It never sticks. As soon as the judge dies, the people go right back to their old ways, and the whole cycle starts over again.
The source material is really clear, though, that these judges are sent by God. They are saviors. Their victories are a sign of God's grace.
Oh, absolutely. They are a sign of grace. But the whole point of the narrative is to show that the judges were not a permanent fix for Israel's problem.
Because the problem was spiritual, not just military.
Right. The judges could deal with this symptom, the foreign oppression, for a while. They could bring peace for a few years. But they couldn't cure the disease in the people's hearts, the stubbornness, the defiance.
They were like a temporary patch on a deep wound.
A very temporary patch. And the fact that the judges themselves were often deeply flawed people just highlights that the whole system, the whole office of the judge, wasn't enough to bring about real, lasting salvation for the nation.
That's a great point. The stories often seem to go out of their way to show us how unlikely these saviors were. It's like the author wants to make sure we know it was God's hand at work, not human greatness.
The author uses irony and surprise all the time to make that very point, to show that God's plans were happening in spite of the people he was using.
So you have someone like Ehud.
Ehud, yeah. The guy who takes out the Moabite king, Eglon. The text makes a point of telling us he was left-handed, which was often seen as a weakness or a defect. But that's how he gets the hidden dagger past the guards.
Yeah, and then there's Deborah.
A woman leading Israel, which was highly unusual in that culture. And the final victory doesn't even go to her general, Barak. It goes to Jael, a non-Israelite woman with a tent peg.
It's a way of making sure God gets all the credit.
It is. And then you get to Gideon, maybe the best example of an unlikely hero.
He's from the weakest clan, calls himself the least in his family.
He's hiding in a wine press when the angel of the Lord finds him. He's scared. He's reluctant. He keeps asking for signs. You know the famous story with the fleece.
So when he wins, it's obvious it wasn't him, especially after God shrinks his army down to just 300 men.
And Jephthah, too. The son of a prostitute, an outcast who becomes a warlord, and then he's begged to come back and save everyone. It all shows God's power, but it also prepares us for the fact that these saviors are, well, they're going to have some major problems.
Let's get into those problems, because they really drive home why a temporary leader was never going to be the answer. Let's start with Gideon again. He has that amazing moment where he refuses to be king.
It's such a high point in the book. The people come to him and say, "Rule over us, you and your son and your grandson." And he gives the perfect theological answer, "The Lord will rule over you."
It sounds like he gets it.
It sounds like it. But then, in the very next breath, he undoes it all. He declines the title of king, but then he immediately starts acting like one.
How so?
He demands all the gold earrings and loot from the battle and uses it to make a golden ephod.
Which is a priestly garment, something he had no right to make.
No right at all. And the text says all of Israel whored after it. This object, made from the spoils of a holy war, became an idol in his own hometown. It just goes to show that even a great deliverer could immediately lead the people back into idolatry because of his own, I don't know, his own ego or bad judgment.
So he proved he wasn't fit for that kind of permanent righteous leadership.
Not at all.
And Jephthah, his flaw is maybe even more horrifying. It's this blend of devotion to God with pagan ideas.
Jephthah's story is such a tragedy. It all centers on this rash vow he makes before he goes into battle. He promises God that if he wins, he'll sacrifice the first thing that comes out of his house to greet him when he gets back.
Which is just That's not how you're supposed to approach Yahweh. That sounds like a bargain you'd try to make with a pagan god.
Like completely rooted in a Canaanite worldview, trying to bribe or coerce God instead of trusting in his covenant promises.
And the first thing to greet him is?
His daughter, his only child. Now, people debate whether he actually killed her or just dedicated her to a life of service, but the plain sense of the text really suggests he went through with it.
A human sacrifice.
A human sacrifice. It's a total violation of God's law, and it shows how messed up even the saviors were. A judge, chosen by God, uses a pagan practice that ends up destroying his own family.
Which brings us to Samson. He feels different from the others. It's like his whole life is a living parable of Israel's story.
That's a great way to put it. His life is a symbol of Israel's calling and Israel's failure. He was set apart from birth as a Nazirite.
With very specific rules. No wine or grapes, no haircuts, and no touching dead bodies.
And the text goes out of its way to repeat those rules 3 times in chapter 13. It's underlining how special his calling was. He was supposed to be completely dedicated to God. And on top of that, he gets this supernatural strength. The Spirit of the Lord rushes upon him.
He has the calling, he has the power, and yet it's all wasted because of his own selfish appetites.
His downfall is his attraction to foreign women. First, the Philistine woman from Timnah, then a prostitute, then Delilah. And the parallel is intentional and obvious.
Samson falls for foreign women.
Just like Israel falls for foreign gods. His choices are all about him. He tells his parents, "Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes." It's that same theme again.
And he just systematically breaks every one of his Nazirite vows.
All of them. He touches the dead lion carcass to get honey. He goes to a wedding feast where there would have been wine. And of course, the big one, he tells Delilah the secret of his hair, and she has it cut.
And when the covenant vow is broken, the power is gone.
His strength, which was a sign of the Spirit's presence, leaves him. He loses his strength and he loses his sight.
He literally becomes a picture of Israel.
He really does. Israel was called to be holy, set apart. But they broke their vows, they lusted after idols, and they ended up becoming blind slaves to their enemies, the Philistines. Samson, grinding grain in a Philistine prison, blind and powerless, is Israel.
It's such a bleak picture. But even there, at the lowest point, the narrator gives us this tiny little sliver of hope.
It's one of the most powerful lines in the book, I think. After his hair is cut and he's captured, Judges 16.22 just quietly says, "But the hair of his head began to grow again." Even though Samson and Israel had been unfaithful, God's faithfulness hadn't run out. It's this tiny hint that God isn't finished with him and he isn't finished with Israel. Restoration is still possible.
And that little bit of hope is what carries us into the final section of the book, chapters 17 to 21. And, well, things get even darker.
They get so much darker. This whole section is not just an appendix. It's the author's final, thundering argument for why a king is desperately needed. It's meant to show the shocking extent of the evil in Israel when there's no leadership.
It moves from the failure of individuals to the total moral collapse of the society.
Right. It starts with the story of a man named Micah and his personal idol.
Story that sounds a lot like Gideon's failure, actually.
It does. Micah steals a bunch of silver from his mom. Then he gives it back, and she says she's consecrating it to the Lord to make an idol. It's the same twisted logic as Gideon's ephod, using things for Yahweh to make things that Yahweh hates.
And he sets up his own little private religion.
He does. He makes one of his sons a priest, which is totally against the law. And then when a traveling Levite wanders by, he hires him for 10 pieces of silver and a new set of clothes.
He thinks having a real Levite will be like a good luck charm.
Yeah, he says, "Now I know the Lord will prosper me." It's just reducing religion to a transaction, to a personal convenience. It's the ultimate, what is right in my own eyes.
And this rot just gets worse. It spreads to an entire tribe, the tribe of Dan.
The Danites can't conquer their own territory, so they go looking for an easier target. And they find this quiet, peaceful town called Lachish, and instead of following the rules of warfare and Deuteronomy, offering peace first,
They just attack.
they just wipe them out. It's brutal and vicious. And on the way there, they stop by Micah's house and steal his idols and kidnap his hired priest to come work for them.
So you have an entire tribe now organized around stolen idols and violence.
It's a terrifying picture. And the author drops this little detail, and that is just, it's devastating. The Levite priest they hire, he's the great-grandson of Moses himself.
Wow.
The direct descendant of the man who got the law on Sinai is now the paid priest for a band of thugs worshiping a stolen idol. It shows that even the most sacred institutions had completely broken down.
And if we think it can't get any worse, it does. with the story from Gibeah.
Gibeah is the absolute bottom. The story is deliberately written to remind the reader of the wickedest story in the Bible up to that point, Sodom and Gomorrah.
So you have a Levite traveling with his concubine, and they need a place to stay in Gibeah, a town in the tribe of Benjamin.
And just like in Sodom, no one will take them in except for one old man who is an outsider himself.
And then the men of the city surround the house.
And they demand the Levite be brought out so they can rape him. It's the exact same pattern as Sodom. But this time, it's not a pagan city. It's a town of Israelites.
And the Levite's response is just as horrifying. He throws his concubine out to the mob to save himself.
An act of unbelievable cruelty and cowardice. She's abused all night and dies on the doorstep. And this man, who should represent the law, carves up her body and sends the pieces to the 12 tribes to call them to war.
The horror of it is just... it's hard to read.
It is, and when the other tribes find out, they demand that Benjamin hand over the guilty men.
But they refuse.
They choose tribal loyalty over God's justice. They decide to protect their own, even though their own committed this monstrous act. And that leads to a brutal civil war.
A war that almost wipes out the entire tribe of Benjamin.
Almost completely. It's a terrifying picture of what happens when a nation turns its back on Yahweh entirely. But then, even in their attempt to fix the problem, they make it worse.
They realize they can't let a tribe disappear. So they have to find wives for the few hundred Benjamite men who survived. But they'd all sworn an oath not to give their own daughters.
So they come up with these human devices, these schemes. First, they attack another Israelite town that didn't show up for the war, kill everyone except the young virgin women, and give them to the Benjamites.
More murder and abduction.
And when that's not enough, they tell the rest of the Benjamites to go hide in the vineyards and kidnap girls who come out to dance at a festival in Shiloh.
It's just one horrific self-made solution after another.
And this whole ugly, violent, chaotic section is designed to scream one thing.
The need for leadership. The need for a king.
That's it. The political chaos is the final, undeniable symptom of the spiritual disease. And the author makes it impossible to miss by repeating that phrase 4 times in these last few chapters.
In those days, there was no king in Israel.
And it's always paired with the chaos. There was no king, so Micah made an idol. There was no king, so the Danites took what they wanted. There was no king, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes.
It's not just a historical note, it's the author's diagnosis of the problem.
It's a theological argument. The author's looking at this history and concluding that the only way to fix this is for Yahweh's rule to be mediated through a human king who will actually enforce God's law.
And the biblical story immediately picks up on that thread.
Immediately. Right after Judges comes the book of Ruth, which is like the anti-Judges. It's a story of covenant faithfulness set during the time of the Judges. And how does it end?
With a genealogy.
A royal genealogy.
Yeah.
It promises a future king from the line of Boaz, who is the great-grandfather of David.
Which leads us right until he's Samuel and the coming of the monarchy.
Exactly. We see the failed kingship of Saul and then the rise of David. And David's reign looks like the answer. He unifies the nation, he brings victory, and in 2 Samuel 7, God promises that David's dynasty, his throne, will last forever.
It seems like the problem is solved. The chaos of Judges is over. David is the king they needed.
He is the immediate historical answer. But the Bible doesn't let us stop there.
Why not?
Because even David, this man after God's own heart, he has the same basic flaw as the Judges.
He does what is right in his own eyes.
With Bathsheba and Uriah. He's driven by selfish desire, he commits adultery and murder. He's a great king, but he's a flawed, sinful man. He can't be the final answer to the deep spiritual problem.
So the story is still pointing forward. It's looking for a king who is even greater than David.
That's right. The ultimate solution has to be a king who is not only righteous himself, but who can actually change the hearts of his people. A king who doesn't just manage the sin, but defeats it.
Which is where the story finds its final fulfillment.
In the reign of Jesus the Christ, he is the true king that Israel and the whole world needed.
And this connects all the way back to the very beginning of the Bible.
It does. It's the fulfillment of that promise in Genesis 3 that the offspring of the woman would come and crush the head of the serpent. Jesus is that promised offspring, that perfect king. The Judges failed because they were human and couldn't fix the spiritual problem. Christ succeeds because he is God and he can.
So the book of Judges isn't just a collection of old war stories. It's a carefully constructed argument designed to create this desperation for a real king, a need that only Christ can fill.
That's it. The failures of Gideon, Jephthah, Samson, They all show the uselessness of human solutions for a spiritual disease. They're all signposts pointing away from themselves and toward the one true king who was to come.
So if we were to wrap up this deep dive, the main takeaway is that Judges shows us that temporary human saviors can't fix a deep spiritual problem like apostasy and self-rule.
Right. Israel didn't just need a better general. They needed a righteous, eternal king to conquer the chaos in their own hearts.
The book is really a warning about what happens when people are left to their own devices, even religious people, without submitting to God's rule.
It is. Once they got comfortable in the land, once life was secure, they immediately traded their devotion to God for the comfort of just doing what everyone else was doing.
That pattern feels uncomfortably familiar. The way they slid into spiritual decay as soon as things got easy.
And that really raises a question for us to think about, doesn't it? How does Israel's pattern of decline, right after being delivered, shed light on the temptation we all face today? The temptation to substitute real covenant devotion to God for whatever seems right in our own eyes, especially when life is good and the pressure is off.
That's a good place to leave it. Israel's problem, then, is really the human problem now. That desire for self-rule over the revealed rule of Yahweh.